Hey, what's up everybody? This is Winston here with another video about software engineering. I just wrapped up the editing for the video that I did about the modal dialog box using Turbo and Stimulus JS and Rails. And it took me, I had about 5 hours of video screen capture footage that I had to edit and cut down to about 10 minutes. And when I was working on that video, I was thinking, geez, where did all of my time go? This was supposed to be a simple box that displays an error message, and I didn't even really get the back end part of it done. I just did that front end interface. So I was like, wow, 5 hours, that's a lot. And that actually wasn't even all the time. That was just the time that I was doing recording screen captures. So it does take a lot of effort to put some of these programming videos together, and while I was doing that, I thought about it and I made a list of 6 things that kind of waste your time and get in the way of writing good code and good software and kind of prevent you from getting your program to the finish line. And I think it's probably a good thing to think about if you're interested in a software engineering career. So here's my 6 things of stuff that happens and kind of slows you down when you're writing code. And the first thing is figuring out the syntax and just the perfect way to write your code. So I'm very perfectionist about writing my code. I want to write my software so that other people can easily read it, but to do all that thinking, it kind of takes time. So a lot of your time that you're writing code, it's typing out it's doing the boilerplate, but it's also thinking, like, what do I want to name this function? What do I want to name this variable so that makes sense? And it's a very iterative process, so you're constantly going back into your code that you already wrote and revising it and changing the names of things and thinking, you know what, I could do this a little bit better. I'm going to move this here. I'm going to move this thing over there. I'm going to create a new file. And then before you know it, like, what you thought would take about 10 minutes, you know, especially if you're a perfectionist like me, you could end up blowing like a whole hour just working on your code quality. And then if you throw in a nitpicking tool like Rubocop, that'll slow you down even further, because then you have this linter telling you ways that you could improve your code, and then you got to resubmit it through the CI system. And then do the Git and everything like that again, and recommit things. So that could kind of slow you down too sometimes. But for this program, I wasn't using a linter. I just took a lot of time trying to write this thing in a way that was easy to read, so that when people look at my example, they could figure out how it's written. And I really recommend, like, if you want to follow some of my programming videos to get the full context of what's going on, I usually provide a GitHub link with a tag to that version of the software that I wrote, so that you could look at the example in its entirety and kind of learn from that. Okay, so the second thing that slows you down, and that's especially true for this type of program that I was working on, is the problem solving aspect. And the reason that it slowed me down a little bit more for working on these videos than other types of other tasks I would probably be doing is because I'm tackling on a new problem. And every time that you're approaching a new programming problem, you kind of have to think about the new approaches. There's a lot that you don't know as far as how you're going to structure the software. And then it takes time to figure that stuff out from like a higher level, from an architecture standpoint. So a lot of this stuff with Turbo Rails or Stimulus JS, it's a new framework that I'm actually learning as I'm writing videos, and it's not something that I've done a million times yet. So a lot of the things I'm writing in these videos, I'm actually also trying to figure out what is the best practice for structuring this, and sometimes that takes a little bit of time. And then kind of like how you're making small syntax changes in your code, like making variable names better and stuff like that. When you're doing the problem solving, sometimes you start on one problem solving path, end up in another problem solving path, and then you're refactoring from a higher architecture level standpoint. It's a very iterative process, and there's a lot of trial and error involved. And along with tackling a new thing where you don't know everything, that kind of leads us into the third item that slows you down, or third item that I spend a lot of time doing, which is reading documentation. So as you know in my videos, I have a lot of screenshots of the particular areas inside of the docs where it's talking about how you would do something. And what I'm doing is I'm taking those very simplistic examples that you have in, let's say, like the turbo documentation, and trying to put it into practice. Now, I think the real value add for my videos is when, as terrific as a program like the Hotwire framework is documented, or like Rails is documented, the examples that they provide are really simplistic. And then when you try to scale that stuff up a little bit, sometimes it takes a little bit more thinking. There's some additional problems involved there. So I think the value add in my videos is that I'm kind of putting it into a larger context where you're solving more of a real world type of problem with the software, a real world software engineering problem. But all of that originates from reading the documentation, figuring out how the software was intended to be used, and the best practices and kind of the mindset of the framework's creators, and then extrapolating that into the application that you're actively developing. And then sometimes they're for very high level problems. Sometimes it's for really simple things like looking at trying to look up CSS tags or simple syntax that nobody can really remember off the top of their head. And not to mention that it changes from version to version of the software, as because you're working with open source software, it changes over time. People are constantly adding to it. So what you were doing in Ruby 2.3, there might be better ways to do it in Ruby version 3.2. So I'm going through the documentation, even just re-educating myself on stuff that I might already know. And by the way, I also want to throw in, along with documentation, that a great source of information, and I mentioned this in the last video that I created, is the discussion forum. So not just the official documentation, but also going to the message boards. So I found a lot of good information that wasn't officially documented, but people were trying to figure out similar problems on the Hotwire message board, and some of that stuff with the validation errors in the modal, I was able to figure out and kind of piece together a solution using the information I found there in those discussion threads. And so that's where another area where I spend a lot of time figuring out how to write my code. Now, for the fourth item, sometimes documentation can't even help you. Sometimes your computer just acts up, or the framework that you're working with doesn't even work like it's supposed to. And then you find out that there's actually some type of a bug in the software that you're building the software from. So for example, when I was making this latest video, some of my CSS wasn't showing up correctly, and that really puzzled me for a little while. And then I go on to Stack Overflow, and I found out that there's, in that version of Twitter Bootstrap that I was using, there was a CSS bug where I think it was like a button or something wasn't displaying correctly, and I had to find a workaround for that. And then sometimes sometimes you'll even find bugs that are even more serious than that. So there was another project I was working on a few weeks ago where I had all of these tests, and it was a financial system, a lot of financial calculations, and it was supposed to spit out some money values, dollars and cents. And I upgraded this program from Ruby 2.7 to version 3.02, and the tests all started to fail. I look at what the failures were, and these money calculations were not coming out, because all of the money values had really weird long strings at the end of the cents. So you'd have a penny with a whole bunch of trailing zeros and random numbers of it, and that was throwing off the tests, and the program was not putting out the correct output. So what was going on? Well, I found out that after spending like an hour of research trying to make sense of what was going on, and then comparing how this calculation works to version 2.7 in the console versus 3.02, found out that Ruby 3.02 had a decimal conversion bug in it somewhere, where when you use the 2 decimal converter, there were times where it could cause a floating point error, and that was something that didn't exist in the software before, and that was a really annoying thing. Something at that level of the software shouldn't happen, but sometimes it does, and it could be really perplexing. So when you get stumped on a bug like that, sometimes it could be really frustrating, and that brings me to the 5th thing. And the 5th thing is kind of off the clock. I wouldn't really be recording screen capture footage when I'm doing this, but it won't. It does slow me down nonetheless, and I just get stuck sometimes, and then I have to put the program away for a while because I've already been working for 3 or 4 hours, and my brain's kind of tired. I'm hungry, and then I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to take a break, get a pizza, and watch some YouTube videos or something. So that's I guess you could count a time waster when you're programming as sometimes you just need a break because you're working on really complex, difficult problems to solve, and sometimes it helps you just step away from it for a few minutes. Sometimes 15 minutes will do it. Sometimes it's helpful to just put it away and get back to it tomorrow. But that does make the software development process slowly. When I wanted to work on this latest video, I thought I was going to get a lot more done. The video ended up just becoming a video about making a dialog box, and surprisingly that took a lot of time and effort. I didn't think a lot more than I thought it was going to take. When I started that video, I thought it was going to encompass about 3 different layers of functionality. I thought I was going to make that dialog box for front end, and I was going to show the whole back end processing loop where it will take the web request, run all the back end logic, and then take the screen capture that I want to do. I thought the video originally was actually going to be about the whole back end process, but it ended up me just playing with that little dialog box and trying to get the JavaScript to work. So yeah, the 5th item is sometimes you just get stuck. Okay, now the 6th and final item on my list is what happens when you're getting unstuck. Well, you come back to your computer after you've left it for a while, and if it's been more than an hour, what's likely going to happen then is you're going to need a little bit of time to get reset. So this happened to me a few times on this video, is that I had to put it away for a while because, you know, sometimes I have so many other things I'm working on. I'll be working on my YouTube channel video. I could get like an hour in here or an hour in there, but what happens is I get that hour done, and then it's a really complex problem that I'm trying to solve, and then so I leave the computer for a while, then I come back to it 2 days later. I'm like, okay, what the heck was I doing? I'm all lost now. I forgot where I left off. So something that I do that helps with that is sometimes just before I leave the computer, I'll make some notes for me on what my thought process was and what I was thinking where I left off. But I mean, still, it's having your process interrupted like that kind of throws off your flow, and then it could take you like a half an hour just to get reacquainted on where you were and open up all those windows containing the documentation again. So that could get kind of annoying. Yeah, so that issue about getting reset and getting interrupted is actually the reason that I work from home very well. As a software engineer, I prefer working from home because I could control my environment a lot better. When you're inside of an office, there's other people there, somebody might be bugging you for help, there's meetings and stuff going on, and that could all get very distracting, and so that's one of the reasons I like working from home. I got my food, I got my my beverage available, and I could control my environment, and it helps control my flow a lot better when I'm programming. So that's my video on giving you a little insight on where your time goes when you're a software engineer and you're writing programs. I hope this little kind of day in the life of a programmer sort of program or sort of video was helpful or interesting to you. The YouTube algorithm promotes your content a lot better the more that you're putting out. So I'm thinking about making more videos like this where I'm just kind of talking about programming in a general sense, because as I mentioned here, it takes a lot of effort to develop good quality videos showing how to problem solve in writing code for a particular framework or to solve certain problems in Rails. A video like this where I'm talking about programming in a more general sense allows me to get a little bit more content made, and hopefully you find that interesting. Hopefully, like for maybe somebody who's like a new developer, it could be like a little morale booster for you to find out what sort of problems somebody who's been doing this for a few years runs into. So anyway, I hope you like that. Be sure to like the video, leave me some comments. If you found this video useful, if you want me to make more content like this, this is kind of a new thing that I'm trying out for my channel. So be sure to subscribe. I have more programming tutorial type content on the way, and I'll see you next time.